Please welcome Ray Travers.
Thank you. Thank you very much. Yeah, thank you very much. It's my pleasure to be here this evening with you, and I already tell that you enjoy each other's company, so I'll just assume that I'm one of you. Yes, my wife and I and our two children did move to East Saanich, to the Gordon Head area in 1974, but my grandmother and her second husband moved to Royal Oak in 1937. So this gives me the opportunity this evening to share with you not only my grandmother's family, but other Travers family that were part of that, and we'll get into that in a moment. There are actually 4 Travers family members who were here from about 1937 to about 1955 or so. And some of you do know I call him my cousin. He's really my dad's cousin. I was explaining to Heather earlier that she says, well, isn't he about the same age as you? Well, he is, but he's the earlier generation. So I said, well, he was born when his dad was about 60. So that makes him for the earlier generation. So that's how that has worked out. So why don't we get into my presentation? I'd be happy to just roll through it, and then we can open it up afterwards to whatever information we can discuss. And I'm here tonight probably to learn as much from you as perhaps I share with you in this presentation, because the reality is that I never really lived in Royal Oak. My family lived in Royal Oak, and we've lived in East Saanich or Gordon Head since we arrived in '74. So why don't we get going here to the first present part of the slide. There we are. That's me. Live in 1709 Carnegie. Okay, let's just move on. Okay, my son and I, who's Michael or Mike, we have done a lot of research on my Travers surname, and as I'll get into it, we're English on that side. And we actually have our own website, and they were from Lancashire, so if you'd like to see a sampling of the research that we've done, if you have a family with similar history from Lancashire, with their experience in the Industrial Revolution and so on, you can find that information there. So next, and if my voice does drop off a little bit, please let me know that you can't hear me. So next. Okay, the Travers surname, where did it come from? Well, of course, these things are lost in legend. But the legend is, it goes back to Norman times, from William the Conqueror and so on, and the people with my surname came along at that time. It means to cross or to traverse. I know as a forester, I would quite often be out with fellows and they would talk about running Travers. You know what a running Travers is? It means that you move through the bush. Well, what I would usually say, I say, well, you guys can run, but this Travers is going to walk. Okay. And then, of course, the legend is that we collected money from travelers at a ford in a river, a bridge, or a city gate. So that's gives you a little bit of where I'm coming from. So next, please. And during the Industrial Revolution, my family were watchmakers and chronometer makers, a very sophisticated type of watch for many years. And what's really interesting as my son and I got into this research, occasionally, not a lot, you can still buy some of their watches on eBay. So it's really exciting when that happens, when you find out something, and of course you know that it was one of their watches because their names are inscribed on it and the year. So there's no question that they are my ancestors. So what happened was that the chronometers, of course, were used by sailing ships to accurately navigate wherever they were going. Basically, so they could go out and find their way back home again. And so what happened was that with the invention of radio, that whole trade went out of existence overnight. It'd be like GPS today. And so that's probably why I'm here, because my grandfather and his family no longer had a trade, because that one had disappeared. So next, please. Okay, my Travers family arrived in Canada during the last best West Canadian immigration policy. Probably a number of you came to Western Canada at the same time, 1895, 1905, 1915, in that era. And you can see that there were actually a large number of people in the family, but these are the only ones who came for a time, and most of them stayed. But there was Ruth, Oliver, my grandfather, Sidney, who moved and lived here, for a time, and then my great uncle Charles, and then there were two others, Frank and Frederick. And so you can see the period of time that they arrived in Canada. Initially it was, of course, to, I guess what was the Northwest Territories prior to Alberta becoming a province. And then, of course, those who arrived after 1905, the province had been established. So next, please. During this period of time when my grandfather, Oliver Travers, and one of his younger brothers, Sidney Travers, who moved here for a while, they were a couple of the crazy guys who tried to make it to the Klondike through Edmonton. Now, in hindsight, it was just a bad idea. Of the 1,500 who started, only, I think, 10% of them made it. And the ones who made it had to go down by river, not by land, and it took them 2 years. Now, not surprisingly, most didn't make it, including my grandfather and his brother. They turned back after about 6 months or so. But anyway, we have a website on that if you want to check it out. It's traverslancashire.net, and then there's a subtitle, The Helpman Klondike in Expedition. So next, please. Anyway, this is Sidney Travers, who moved here. He was one of the Klondikers, and this is taken in Edmonton about 1897. So that whole era, if I can put it this way, I was raised on stories about the Klondike because of the Trail of 98 and so on, so it had an imprint in who I am. Next, please. And this, of course, is the party that was about to head off, and this was taken right on the grounds of where the Alberta legislature buildings exist today, and there you can see the party. Now, what was really, quite frankly, dumb, they didn't get going until March. Well, you can realize if you're going 2,500 miles to Dawson City, theoretically, and you're not leaving until March, well, the snow isn't going to be there for after another month or so, so no wonder that they got into trouble. None of the horses survived. None of them. Okay. All of the men survived, but as far as we know. That's got started. But anyway, that's kind of what the amazing things that people will do if there's just a very small chance that you can get really, really rich. Next, please. Okay. My grandmother, and I focused my presentation around her. She's kind of the common thread through all of this. Anna, and she was French-Canadian, Dumont, and my grandfather, they got married in 1902 at Hobbema near Wetaskiwin, and she was my grandmother. And that's my grandfather sitting there, Oliver Travers, and my first name is Oliver, so I got it from him. Next, please. But we lost him in World War I on the 29th of October, 1917. And so, of course, that had a dramatic impact on my family for reasons that I still don't really know the full scope of it. All I really know is that it had a huge impact, and probably we were not alone. We're not alone. Most families were affected in some way by World War I. This one we were affected very deeply. But he got the Military Cross, and on the bottom of there, in the family inscription, it says, "Far from home and loved ones, he gave his life for freedom." Okay, so that's my grandfather's sacrifice, what he did in World War I. He was with a battalion from Edmonton. Next, please.
Where is that cemetery?
Oh, that's in West Flanders. It's New Brandhoek Military Cemetery number 3. What it was, to give you some sense, the battlefields were a little further to the east, and he was a quartermaster, which meant he was moving around, okay? And he was probably got by a sniper, I would guess, and he probably survived for a while. But this is a small cemetery on the way back to the English Channel, and he's buried there in a cemetery of about 300 graves. So that's what we know about him. So anyway, the Travers of Royal Oak. There was Anna. What happened was that when we lost my grandfather, my grandmother Anna married his brother Charles in 1926, I think it was, and they stayed in the Gruard area, Lesser Slave Lake area of northern Alberta. And the interesting thing is that many of them were there for 20 or 30 years. They finally got the message that it was not a prosperous place to live. They pulled out prior to oil, and they moved here, okay, mainly in the 30s. So there was Anna and Charles. They arrived in the West Saanich Road area about 1937, and then her brother-in-law, Sidney Sr. and Clara. And there's the family there, Ed, Harry, and Dick. Now, Dick is the only one of that generation who's still with us. And the reason, as I explained earlier, is that his dad was 60 years old or so when he was born. And then there was children of Anna and Oliver. The eldest one was Sidney. I called him Sidney Jr., and they had 5 children. And we'll get into some of the details of them. Ed lived in the Meadowbrook Lane area west of Prospect Lake. I really don't know a lot about him. All I know is that that's where his property was, and I do know that he left there with his family about 1975 or so. So anyway, we'll get into more of these details here in a minute. Just next, please. Okay, Anna and Charles. I've already said some of this, and I quite frankly don't know exactly where their house was. I think Heather was telling me, or someone was telling me, that it was probably close to Heatherdale Lane. All that my cousin Dick has told me, it was on a side road where the new Royal Oak School was built. And so if you can help me out as to exactly where that was, that would be of real interest to me. So next, please. Okay, now my son looked at this, and there is an error here. The 1941 census has not yet been released. This was the 1941 electoral registry, is what it was. But you can see the names of Charles, my great uncle. It says Mrs. Charles, that's Anna, and then her brother-in-law and sister-in-law also living at Royal Oak, and of course Royal Oak 1. We don't know exactly where that was, but that's the information that I have. Okay, so next, please. Okay, here's the home of Anna and Charles, and I imagine that this is a fairly typical style home for this area at that time, sort of, I guess what you call half-timbered or whatever. But anyway, this was their home, probably close to Heatherdale Road. Next, please. And these are just a series of photographs that we have of their life there. And I don't know who these other people are in the picture. I just know that there's Anna second from the left, and that's Charles on the right. He also was a military man from the Edmonton Regiment, but he came back from the war. So, next, please. Obviously, they spent a lot of time in the yard. There's Charles in the yard, probably somewhere around 1945 or so. Next, please. Now, in the family of Anna and Oliver, my grandparents, there were 6 boys. Sidney was the eldest, and I called him Sidney Jr. And their 4th son was Percy, that's my dad. And then another one of my uncles is another Oliver in the family, that's him on the right. And he lived in North Vancouver at the time, and as my grandmother and her second husband were getting to about 70 years of age, he persuaded them to move to North Vancouver, so that's where they moved from here. Next, please. And there's Alice with Charles and Anna, also taken in the yard, probably about 1945, 1946 or so. Okay, next, please. And this is, of course, one of their grandchildren. My grandson Dennis. If you look real carefully, you can see him sitting in the trees there, and they're both probably an apple tree or whatever it is that they're having a good time in. So next, please. Okay, this is where I'm really interested to share this information with you. When I say Sidney Jr., you know, that's Anna's oldest son. That's my dad's oldest brother, okay? And they came here from they call it the Peace River country. He was attracted here during the war to work in the dockyards. That's why he arrived here. They lived in the Prospect Lake store, and as far as I know, they owned it for a year or two. And I have his memoirs here, and that's what he says. He drove horses for tally-ho wagons. They had the children there, you can see their names. And then they moved back to the Peace River country, and then they retired here to the Victoria area in 1974. And they're both buried just 5 minutes away here in the Royal Oak Burial Park, close to the crematoria there. I just went over this evening and visited their graves briefly. So next, please. Okay, here's their family. Again, this is my uncle, my dad's eldest brother. This is Sidney and his wife Dolly and their 5 children. And they lived on the in the Prospect Lake store for a while, and then I'm told that they sort of moved back and forth to the home of her grandmother and my grandmother Anna, close to, I'm told, somewhere close to the Institute Hall, Women's Institute Hall. Next, please. Okay, here's Anna's brother-in-law, her husband's younger brother, Oliver. He's the Klondike guy. This is the Sydney Syrian guy who tried to go to the Klondike with my grandfather. And according to Dick, he said he lived in a big rental house on West Saanich Road owned by the Melishes. Now, I'm told by others that that's a name familiar to you. Okay, you know that name? Okay. And then the graves of Sidney and Claire, they're both in Ross Bay Cemetery. So they never left this area after they arrived. Okay, next please. Sidney Sr. was quite a traveler. This is a visit that he made to New Zealand, and the reason he went there is that one of their family members emigrated to New Zealand at about the same time that they immigrated to Canada. So next please. And of course we start to get into the younger generations. Here's the eldest son of Sidney and Clara, Ed, and he married Joan Broadhurst. I believe she still lives at Vista Heights in Victoria. If she's not there, it's because I've lost touch. But we lost Ed about 10 years ago. I can send you his obituary. I do have that information. But that was the family that lived on Meadowbrook Lane. Okay, next please. Yeah, there we are. Okay, and that's about all that I know about these folks. Okay, if you know more, that would be of real interest to me. Okay, next please. Okay, here's the fellow that we do know quite well, who is my dad's cousin and probably my second cousin, but anyway, born in 1934. He said he attended school at Royal Oak Elementary. Grade 5, attended the new Royal Oak School. He said Miss Phillips, is that a name we know? Okay, we know that, was the teacher. He said that Alma Jackson would remember, Dick. Is she someone that all the rest of us know here? Okay, and then he worked on towboats and princess boats in the 1950s, and then later, my understanding is that he went into construction, and Heather told me that she took care of his accounting tasks after that, and he still lives in Duncan. Okay, I visit him, I don't know, a couple times a year. He just loves this family history stuff, so that's what keeps us together. Next, please. Okay, then in the later years of Anna and Charles living here in Victoria, they sold the property on Royal Oak and moved close to Tillicum Mall. Kerr Avenue is located there. No, that house is no longer there. I went by there a few years ago. There's a new house on that property, but you can see them there in the yard. Okay, so and then after that they moved to North Vancouver. Next, please. Okay, just a couple of wind-up slides here. I mentioned to you that both my grandfather Oliver and his brother, one of his brothers Charles, were served with the what was called the Loyal Edmonton Regiment, the 49th Battalion. Charles did come back and married my grandmother. And at this time, I'm a citizen volunteer with Saanich Archives for something called the Saanich Remembers Project. And we're all invited to do this. So if you have relatives, ancestors, whoever, friends or whatever, you can find them on the website, the Saanich Remembers Project. And what this project is all about is that just after World War I, an honor roll was developed, and there were 355 names on it. Now, I always have trouble getting my head around. There only were 5,000 people in all Saanich at that time. So 355 names, and we think that's low. We think that it's probably closer to 700 names. But anyway, the whole idea is to update this honor roll. We'll have a number of activities this fall, some lectures and so on. And what we're all invited to do is to put on file their military information and that'll become part of the permanent records of Saanich Archives, so that you want your military relatives to be documented and to have that information. They were all invited to do that, and I've done that with my great uncle Charles. So next, please. And then just to wrap up, this is the grave. When my grandmother Anna, in her very late years, after she had lost her second husband, Charles, she remarried a man by the name of Dave McMahon, and they lived in Esquimalt, and her grave is just over here, just 5 minutes away, walk. And so she's in that grave, identified as Anna McMahon. So there we are, kind of gone full circle from when they arrived to where she now is remembered with this plaque in Royal Oak Burial Park. And I'd be happy to respond to any comments or questions that you have. That's basically an overview of what my son and I know about our 4 Travers family members that lived in here. When I say 4, there was Anna and Charles, there was Sidney and Clara, there was Ed, and then there was Dick. Okay, and so that's what I mean by the 4 members of my family. So thank you, Amy, for inviting me. It's been fun to share what I know with you. I'm delighted to be able to donate this book to you. We had an extra one. This is the memoirs, the life history of my dad's oldest brother, Sidney Jr. And so, Eden, would you like to accept this on behalf of the association? I'm a forester, so I'm very interested in the Shelburne Memorial trees. Are you familiar with what they are? You know, they're the London plane trees. And the initial idea was to plant them all the way from Mount Doug down to Bay Street. And today we've only got 1/3 of them left. And the reason for that is that post-World War II, when Shelburne was widened from 2 lanes to 4 lanes, we lost a big chunk of them. Now the people of Victoria from Hillside South have taken real good care of those trees. But north of that, I think if the citizens had objected from Torquay North, we would have lost those too. But we don't. They're there, and they're from a forestry point of view, they were a good choice. They're very tolerant to abuse, lopping and things like that, or kids with vandalism tendencies and so on. And so they will last 200 or 300 years. We're committed. You know, we're going to be at this project for the next 5 years. You know, to make sure that we learn everything we can. And one of the main objectives of the activity is to try and understand the impact of the war on the people of Saanich. You know, we're not going to get that much into what was going on in Europe, but what we're really interested in is what the effect was on the people back home. And so anything along that line about, well, there's just some amazing stories. One of the amazing stories that Carolyn found was that the young men who were working for Saanich when the war broke out and they weren't married got pig slips. They were terminated. And so she is an example of the letter basically saying, because you're not enlisted, you no longer have a job. So it was rough. It was rough for a lot of people, for what they had to put up with. What I did learn in terms of, I guess, my understanding of our government, the provincial government, after the war was over, really tried to do the right thing for the returning veterans. There were a number of nursing homes established, and then also there was a major land program. A lot of the early irrigation projects, like in the Okanagan and in the Fraser River with the Pitt River and so on, and here on the island, they were started by the provincial government land program at the time, like Merville up here, and they're close to Canada. That's a name from the French battlefields. That's why that name is there. That's a battlefield name. So at any rate, it's just an amazing story what our forebears had to cope with, and as you know, when Britain declared war, I think it was the 2nd of August, 1914, we were automatically in it. We didn't have a choice. And then the mobilization that occurred is just amazing, that somehow people dug deep and found the resources send their very best and brightest over there, and many didn't return home. So does any of your family go back to the 30s and 40s, 50s? Then we can have a chat, and maybe you can help me, get at least, I'd like to have the basics, at least where they lived, exactly. and then whatever organizations my family may have been involved in at the time. And of course, we'll start with my grandmother, because she's kind of the central figure in my story.
I think the house they lived in, where he says on the side road by the new Royal School,
Right.
that house is still there.
Oh,
It's
is it?
the one I'm thinking of.
Oh,
It's
is it?
on the driveway down.
Is it on Heatherdale?
No, it's, what do they call it now? Trevino Lane.
Oh, I see, Trevino, okay.
Right across from the end of Pipeline.
Oh, I'll take a drive over
And
there and
there's
see
a
if
church there,
Right.
and then the house.
Okay. Yeah, I know that
That could be it.
my cousin Elizabeth, like that was, Sydney and Dolly's daughter, who's my age. She told me stories about riding her bicycle from Prospect Lake store down to visit our grandmother's house and going back and forth along West Sandwich Road. So. Well, that's it. It's been my pleasure to be here, and hopefully we've started something here that will help me out and you out to learn a little bit more about this wonderful area that we all live in.
Thank you.
Very good.